Welcome to the Village News in Review. I am your host, Adrianne Shropshire, and it would not be a Newsweek in Review without my co-host, Anoa Changa-Peck.
Hey y'all, there's always a lot happening, and we're here to make sure you got the latest issues important to our communities.
So, as Anoa said, there's always a lot going on. And here at the Village News, we are tracking news stories all day, every day, all throughout the week. But we also recognize that everyone is not doing that. People have lives, they have things that they want to do that are not just sitting in front of news screens, and reading newspapers. If people even do that anymore, Anoa, I don't know.
I'm in
Um,
Atlanta. We don't even have our paper record in print anymore, so I have no clue.
Well, there you go. So local newspapers are not even there for us anymore. But Anoa and I thought that what we would do to try and help keep people up on what's happening, particularly as we head into the last 100 days or so of this midterm election cycle, we will scour the news every week. And on Fridays, we will bring to you the highlights so that you don't have to feel like you missed an entire week of news. So let's just get into it. Anoa, normally I would
Yeah.
ask you what's the most bonkers thing that happened this week, and ask you to share not only what was most bonkers, but things that people might have missed. But I'm going to just jump right in, actually, and talk about a thing that people might have missed, but is also completely bonkers. And that is that the State Department this week issued essentially what is a McCarthyism style Red Scare report on the country of Cuba. And essentially claiming, the report essentially claims that Cuba is responsible for all of the activism, all of the pushback against authoritarianism, all of the social movements that have happened in America from ever. Uh, which seems insane on itself, but it is, it lists a bunch of activists and elected officials that apparently are Cuban operatives. I'm going to name some of them because the list itself makes it clear how outrageous, dangerous, and sort of a throwback to the 1950s this report is. So it's a targeted list of people and a targeted list of organizations that span the gamut of social justice movements, but also completely made up organizations. And we'll talk about that. It includes my mayor, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. It also includes the former mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa. It includes the entire BLM movement, because why not? It includes former San Francisco DA, and I always get this name wrong, DA Chesa Boudin. It includes, of course, New York City's Mayor Zoran Mamdani, because he is apparently, the boogeyman for them. It
I mean,
includes
did you see his recent speech? He definitely is the
I
boogeyman for
I
somebody.
did. It includes Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream. And of course, it includes the completely made up Antifa, right? And this idea that Antifa is some kind of structured organization that is, organizing people across the country is complete nonsense. But this report is full of propaganda. It's full of over the top language. And it really does harken back to the McCarthyism era of the 1950s, where essentially the government, built up this Red Scare, essentially saying communism is everywhere, which is precisely, if people are paying attention, what the Trump administration is saying right now. They need a villain. Right. They need
Yep.
a villain for the midterms.
Yep.
And apparently just calling Democrats dummies is not enough. So they've created this Red Scare that communism is everywhere. It's lurking in the bushes. And everyone that they don't like is a communist. Same thing they said about Martin Luther King, right? But that was this thing that came out that I'm not entirely sure that people paid attention to, but it is a part and parcel of this authoritarian tendency
Yeah.
that this administration, sort of demonstrates every day.
I appreciate you bringing this up because this probably would have been the weird thing. And it's really not weird. It's definitely wild. Like we have, when we think back, because it was a bunch of Black thinkers, academics, a lot of entertainers and culture workers, right? So Paul Robeson, Du Bois, Lorraine Hansberry, and one of my personal favorites, jazz musician Hazel Scott. She was the first person to have to host a national TV show, I think it was. And so like we have seen like this in history, but it's not even that it's it's a continuation of something that never went away, because they've always tried to blame Black activism, the advocacy, and anything they tried to shift and deal with the way the government oppressed or just did not honor people's rights and freedoms on someone else, right?
Yeah.
Whether it was Russia, but it's always like the Red Scare, the communists. It's a way to scare the good people, red, white, into not associating with any of us, right? And it's weird, right, Adrian? Because it's also a mix of the pot calling the kettle black right now type of thing. Considering like it's also framing Cuba as being this intrusive, destabilizing force in Latin America.
Yeah. Yes. When at a time when the Cuban people don't have electricity, at a time where the Cuban people are hungry, right, because of the intensified American blockade, the idea that either the people or the government of Cuba are in any position to be threatening anyone is completely absurd, right?
They have the resources to do so.
Right. Their electrical grid is non-existent, right? So this idea is absurd, and again, just is a demonstration of the degree to which the GOP, the Trump administration, MAGA. Well, I don't think it's actually three different things at this point, right? It's just one. Need a villain as they continue to spiral. As heading into the midterm elections. And so now it's this weird communist scare that again is very dangerous. You talked about the history of this, right? And you named a bunch of Black folks, both thinkers and entertainers. And I will say that this list, to me, when I saw it, I thought, oh, it's a whole bunch of Black people on here. So this idea that whoever they decide are their political enemies need to get tagged with something, so that the country will look at them suspiciously. It's also just in the era of political violence. This is not a moment to be tagging people and saying these people are our enemies, because we have seen what happens when particularly this administration labels people. People get harassed, they get unalived, right? And so this is particularly dangerous, and I don't know, a harbinger in some ways of what is to come.
And we know the way the law is set up too, the way the Trump administration has been trying to set up with like EOs and different, what is it, the MPSM7, I think, like claiming that if there's aid to terrorism and trying to reclassify what domestic terrorism actually is, right? We've seen even some of the billionaire class, right? Like folks who get upset about people protesting at like data centers and things like that, trying to say that the fundamental First Amendment right of free speech, of the right to protest, is terrorism. So like this stands alone as one thing, but when we look at the totality of everything that's happening under the Trump administration, and no, it's not new in America, but the way this is coming together right now in the 21st century is definitely something that we need to have eyes on, or at least know, because you might not think that you're a political person, or you might not think that you're connected to anything radical, but if the government is labeling people like Karen Bass,
what if they decided?
I didn't know Karen Bass was the West Coast Mamdani. But she's more DSA.
I think let's be clear, Karen Bass was Mamdani before Mamdani.
So. I mean, we got the pictures to prove it of young Karen with the afro and the bullhorn.
Well, we have the pictures to prove it with her policies, I think.
With her policies.
Just the policies.
But even in the report, like they went back to 1970 pictures of a young Karen Bass.
Except for, if I can just say, Anoa, that is not Karen Bass in the 1970s. So color block, we did not have color block blouses and dresses until the 1980s, so that they pulled a picture of Karen
Oh,
Bass from the
come on, Adrian,
1980s
with the
and said,
disinfo.
this is Karen Bass in 1970. Karen Bass
Break it down.
may have in fact been a cheerleader on her high school cheer team in 1970. Like, I need to do the math, but that is not Karen Bass from the 1970s, that picture that they included, which is
I
also just a, like, you're bad at your job. You
You're
know,
bad at your
you're
job.
bad
It's
at
like
your
AI.
job.
AI. They check their history AI. But this is why they want to erase the history. This is why they've been doing so much of what they've been doing, so that we can't check them like this, so that we can't actually like make these connections. And we also can't learn the lessons from how people were able to weather those storms and get reforms and push back. You know, just
Yeah.
thinking about these types of moves, along with trying to claim people are a part of the new communist wave, is part of how they're trying to like really destabilize and, um, take power, and just
Yeah.
demoralize us. So
This Cuba story, though, starts to turn things on its head, right? This
yeah,
idea that, there's this new wave of, threat to the U.S. We know an escalation from, as you were saying before,
yeah,
kind of an escalation from this attempt at investigating social justice organizations. We've seen organizations be called in to hearings, right? We
yeah,
saw SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, get called in for their apparently their hate work, which is essentially bringing down hate groups in America. And so there's this sort of turning on its head kind of thing, that this idea that what we have all fought for, right? What our community certainly has fought for, to push back, to end discriminatory practices, right? To end the restriction of rights, or the not even offering of rights to whole classes of people in America. All of those things that we fought for, suddenly those things are wrong, right?
right,
And one of the stories that sort of uh, is a perfect display of the absolute nonsense that happened this week. And again, not sure that people noticed it, was a decision out of the Fifth Circuit that essentially that was about a school district in Louisiana that had a civil rights
hmm
investigation happening. And that investigation is essentially saying that the school district has not desegregated, and that it must desegregate because, of course, Brown v. Board was in 1954, which means that all schools should have desegregated by now. But no, school districts have not completely desegregated, and in many ways are resegregating. Anyway, the Fifth Circuit essentially said, yeah, no, you don't have to desegregate. You can keep all white schools if you'd like. And so this is when we think about the kinds of court decisions that are literally moving forward, Project 2025,
yeah,
literally moving forward this administration and this MAGA movement's effort to take us back to the days of Jim Crow. This court decision sits squarely in that agenda. And so I want to talk about that a little bit more, because it's a really critical decision that we should be paying attention to, because it has implications for more than just a school district in Louisiana. And to do that, I want to bring in our good friend, movement lawyer, and sort of extraordinary brain, Judith Browne Dianis, to talk to us about sort of what this case means. Well, thank you for joining us, Judith. I appreciate, you're always the go-to person when things happen in general in our country these days, but specifically when there are what I feel like complicated questions about what is happening in our courts. And this decision by the Fifth Circuit, which I will say that I text you and was like, please, I text the chat and was like, please, to my lawyer friends, explain how it is that a court in the United States of America just opened the door for resegregation. Now, we know we've talked about the way that the federal government has been allowing for kind of resegregation both in the government and its agencies, putting in policies that strip away protections for civil rights. We've seen this particularly in the Department of Education. But this decision that I almost missed feels really like what in the Jim Crow is happening. So, can you tell us just a little bit about what the decision was and what the implications are for schools, not just in Louisiana, but across the country?
Sure. So this is a case that's in Concordia Parish in Louisiana. And it's an old school desegregation case that, most of these cases come from the 50s and 60s,
Right,
but they have stayed around. It's important to understand that they have stayed around because when we litigate these cases, we want the courts to maintain supervision because these are school districts that continue to do wrong by Black students. And
right,
so these cases have stayed around because they have allowed us to, when something comes up, let's say they decide to close a school or they've redistricted the school boundaries, et cetera, we can go back into court. And if there's a racially discriminatory angle problem, then we bring that to the court. And so
right,
they've remained under court supervision. But here you have the Fifth Circuit saying enough already. But this is the thing,
right.
Adrian. So when you text me, like I was like, and right? And I'm
Yeah,
saying and because the Trump administration has been very aggressive at going after these cases that they're a party to, right? Because the federal
yeah,
government has been a protector of civil rights. They
right,
are actually a a party in most of these school desegregation cases. They're the ones supposed to be
right,
protecting Black kids, right?
right. They are
And
supposed to
here
bring the protections.
they're
Yes,
the ones who are there. They are the lawyers for the people. And they are
right,
there. They have brought a lot of these cases. The Legal Defense Fund and the Lawyers Committee are in a lot of those cases, also representing Black students. But the federal government has played this critical role in school desegregation cases since the beginning of school desegregation cases.
right,
So
right,
now, fast forward, the Trump administration doesn't like court supervision of school districts and in school desegregation cases because they actually don't believe that there is any racial discrimination going on except against white people, right?
right.
And so
Yeah,
what they've been doing is that they have aggressively been going after these consent decrees and trying to shut them down. And in particular, what they've been doing, which is different from the past, is that they have entered into agreements with the local school district or the state to end the court supervision. So this is a problem because while you're dismantling and closing down the Department of Education, getting rid of
mm-hmm.
all the regulations that actually keep Black students safe from discrimination, you're
Right,
also getting out of the litigation that has been there on the books for decades that has
right,
allowed us to actually continue to enforce. And the thing is, people might think, oh, school desegregation cases, these are, oh, let me tell you, I litigated a case where the lawyer for the school district was the same lawyer who opposed desegregation back in 1960 something. And he's
right.
still the person, and you still have county like school board members who have been on
Yeah,
school boards since the beginning of
right,
time. They don't have any kids there. And
right.
so, and we know
Their
just what the
grandkids are gone out of
right,
the school
right. So
district.
they,
Yeah,
and we know that racial discrimination is not historic; it's also current day. And so,
yeah, yeah.
so this is problematic. They've done it in several districts in Louisiana. There's apparently about 130 consent decrees that are left at Department of Justice, and they're just going to shut
Wow.
down all of those. And I think it's
Well,
important to understand that it's not just this; it's also in policing.
yeah, so let's come to that one in a second, but I do want to just um make a connection to, I mean, yes, the thing that you said about they're for most people they're like school, desegregation is like that's like
Right.
we have integrated schools, right? Like there's not going to be discrimination in schools. That's just not true. And the sort of breaking down of the legal protections, right, that said that you cannot discriminate against people based on race going to schools. That feels like a sort of opening of a new front, but it
Right.
also brings us back to the questions that many of the justices that now sit on the Supreme Court were asked during their Senate hearings, which was, do you think that Brown v. Board was properly decided on? And they would not answer. Right.
Right.
And so it just makes me, I mean, we know about Project 2025 and all of the dismantling of public education that exists, the policies that exist inside of that document. And it really is just playing out before our eyes. But you also, I guess, one should be thinking about as we see all these cases going up to the Supreme Court, and with the exception of birthright citizenship, right? They
Hmm.
have ruled terribly, right, on
Right.
anything that is about protecting Black folks. We talk about the connection to voting rights as well. I mean, you were about to talk about the police consent decrees, but obviously one of the things that the court said in its voting rights decisions is, yeah, no one needs to give oversight to anyone anywhere, right? It doesn't matter
Right.
what their history of stopping Black people from voting is.
Right.
We no longer need anyone to have oversight. That's voting rights.
Right.
But you have these justices that now sit on the Supreme Court who refuse to answer whether or not
Hmm.
that Brown v. Board was decided properly. This
Right.
feels like some cases being sent up to the Supreme Court, or the potential for some of these cases to get sent up to the Supreme Court, for the Supreme Court to say,
Right.
actually, we no longer need those protections at all in our public school system.
Right. I mean, and they are dismantling the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Amendment,
Right. Yeah.
just across the board. And so they're chipping away at it, and they're going to find every walk of life to do that in, right?
Yeah.
So affirmative
Hmm.
action, let's get rid of
Yeah.
that because we're over
Yeah.
that. We're fine.
Hmm.
Schools, you can go anywhere if you are smart enough, right?
Right. Right.
So the Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, we don't need that any longer because, we've got Black elected officials, they would say, right?
Right.
And we've got,
Except for the ones
and
we're trying to get rid of.
right, exactly. And then black voters can vote. So what are we
Right.
talking about? So they
Right.
they really have I mean, this has been their agenda. It's been their
Yeah.
agenda for a long time. Before Project 2025,
Yeah.
they want to say we are in a colorblind society, so we no longer need protections, civil rights protections for Black and brown people.
Right.
And in fact, this Department of Justice would say that we only need civil protections for white men,
Right.
because they are
That
the
is what they're
aggrieved
saying.
ones who have lost
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. You were starting to go into a conversation about consent decrees in general, that
Yeah,
are that are being that
yeah,
undermined, right, thrown out, not just when we think about schools being protected, but also in terms of police departments that have a pattern and practice of abuse.
right,
Talk about that and the sort of the connection of these
right.
things.
Right. So, Department of Justice, right, again, is the federal protector of our civil rights. And, we it's not too long ago that we remember that they investigated police departments,
Right.
went into court, got them under court supervision with monitors in place, etc. Now, some of us would say that those consent decrees weren't that great, or whatever, the reforms weren't that great, but it was a way in which the feds could come in and hold police departments accountable.
Yeah.
The Trump administration is DOJ is pulling out of those. So, wasn't that
Yeah.
long ago, George Floyd, Minneapolis, they've gotten out of that one.
Right.
In
Yeah.
Minneapolis, where we have
Right.
seen continued problems with the police, in
Right.
Cleveland, in Louisville, where Breonna
Right.
Taylor was murdered by the police,
Yeah.
in Newark, New Jersey, in New Orleans. They're closing these things down. And see, the problem is that, like, the feds played an important role in intervening on behalf of Black people. It's very difficult for organizations and
Yeah.
of lawyers to bring these kinds of cases because the
Yeah.
Department of Justice has standing to get information that we couldn't get as
Right.
civil rights
Yeah.
attorneys, right?
Right.
They can go to a court and be like, we want a consent decree in ways that private attorneys and organizations cannot.
Yeah.
And they have pattern and practice cases. We can't bring pattern and practice cases as civil
Hmm.
rights organizations. So we need to be clear about, like, these things that are happening all add up to the
You're right.
Fed saying no more civil rights protections. Not only are we going to try and gut them through the courts, but we're also going to make sure that the feds, who have played an incredibly important role since Jim Crow and before, are not
Right.
there to protect us any longer.
Yeah, and so we are just over 100 days to the midterm election. And while, no one advocates that voting is everything and that if you vote, every single thing is going to change, but these are the decisions
Right.
that the federal government makes, right? And we're talking about electing U.S. members of Congress, members of the U.S. Senate. These are the places that we have a system of checks and balances for a reason. But that when we say elections have consequences, these are the actual consequences.
Right.
That we now have a federal government that refuses to intervene where clear discrimination is happening across a whole range, whether it's police departments, whether it's voting rights, whether it is school segregation, Judith. Segregation. We're talking about bringing back segregation because it's simply not needed anymore. And I think that
And
I would
many schools still haven't desegregated, right? Districts haven't
right,
desegregated. So they're like, good, this is good. Let's just keep
right.
it this way.
Right. And this is, I think, again, this sort of like, are when you talked about the school boards and people sitting on school boards forever and making these decisions, I'll just say again, when we think about elections, there's all kinds of elections, right? That folks need to be paying attention to make sure that their communities and
Right.
their kids, quite frankly, in this case, are protected. All right, Judith Browne Dianis, always good
Thank
to talk
you.
to you. I am
Thank
always trying to
you.
figure these things out and always calling, and always bothering you, quite frankly. Texting, calling,
I'm like, oh,
explaining.
Adrianne.
I appreciate you breaking this down for us. We will have you
Thanks.
back again and again and again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was great, Anoa. I always appreciate Judith's analysis on anything obviously related
Absolutely.
to the law, but when we're thinking about civil rights and voting rights, she is one of the people in the country who we all should be paying much more attention to. And if you're not following
Absolutely.
Judith Browne Dianis, you should go follow her on
And it's so
all the social
accessible.
media.
It's so accessible the way she talks about it too. Like, you can really understand. You don't need to have gone through all 3 years of law school or practice to understand her. So I always appreciate when she breaks it down and ties it to why it matters for us
Yeah.
now.
That's great. That is great. And I also want to talk a little bit about what is mattering to us as we look forward to the next week. so let's sort of shift. I know that we have I keep talking about, going to the 100 days or the final 100 days. But we also have some anniversaries coming up,
Yeah.
or throughout this month. You have been always paying close attention to the sort of historical moments that are important and more important than ever right now. Things like the anniversary of the 14th Amendment that we need to be paying attention to. So we have this anniversary coming up this upcoming week. What's that
Yeah.
about?
Yeah, so and I know it sounds like weird when we think about these commemorative dates, right? But like in 1868, almost 160 years ago, the 14th Amendment was ratified in early July. And but this week coming up on, I think it's the 28th or the 29th, it was certified by the Secretary of State, right? Like, it was the actual
Mhm.
declaration and recognition by the United States government that the 14th Amendment was in fact ratified, that it was in fact a part of the Constitution. And it's really important, I think, to really think about that. So there are like the dates when constitutional amendment or a law is passed and signed into law with an amendment. It's when it's ratified, and then but when it's certified, that's when it's like it's done, it's in there. And when you think
Right.
about the Reconstruction era and what it really took to get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and the fact that we had to have 3 separate amendments, right, during that period post emancipation to actually resolve, well, halfway resolve, half-heartedly resolve, and address the question of Black citizenship, Black political participation, just our abilities to exist fully as Black people in this country, right?
Equal protection, as
Equal
Judith
protection.
said,
So the
is a
14th
part of the
Amendment
14th
so the
Amendment.
14th
Right.
Amendment is citizenship, right? And we saw this come up in the conversation around birthright citizenship, equal protection. When we talk about equal protection under the law and due process, like these things are built into the 14th Amendment. But the 14th Amendment, because due process was already in the Constitution, but it was in the Fifth Amendment. And there was a lot of arguments, particularly from the states' rights crew, that the Fifth Amendment, that didn't actually apply to the states, right? But the 14th Amendment makes it very, very clear that yes, it does. and there are, there are these provisions in the 14th Amendment, and it's so salient. It basically birthed the whole practice of civil rights and equity and social justice. We're talking about what was used to be able to give like rights and freedoms across the board, right? So when we're thinking about Roe v. Wade and the right to, bodily autonomy, right? Equal protection in the law. When we're thinking about like just civil rights and discrimination and, racial, gender, it all comes from that foundational principle. Voting rights, right? There's a voting rights element built in with equal protection under the law. And yet, even though that was there, we still needed the 15th Amendment. But the 14th Amendment, though, just sits right there as a linchpin, almost as the real crux of the Reconstruction era amendments. And we've seen increasingly over the last several years the way this particular conservative majority of the Supreme Court has tried to whittle away, not just ignore or reinterpret or disregard it like in prior iterations of the court, but literally like try to rewrite the meaning and the intent of what it should be. And it's fascinating, right? Because even in the birthright citizenship case, you have Justice Thomas, and it's done this way intentionally because he's the Black guy, right? Talking about how this is only supposed to be for Black people. Now, suddenly, all of a sudden, conservatives on the Supreme Court are willing to say that it is okay to have laws that are tailored to address or redress things that are done to Black people. They won't agree about this any other way. And it's only to deprive and deny other people rights, right? And that is another reason why, for me, really understanding the importance and the enduring legacy of the 14th Amendment, as we're seeing the way in which the right, and then just some of these factions, we were talking about Project 2025 earlier in the conversation, are trying to like just curtail things to their whims and will, so to speak, and not what actually was the intent, not in actually what is actually needed and necessary for us to have a fair and just society. So that is on the 28th, and we will have a piece, another Village plug, but we will have a piece for me on the 14th Amendment and just a breakdown next week on thevillagemedia.com.
So we are out of time. So
Much.
there's a lot more that we could in fact cover. But hopefully we have given you all a couple of things to go do a little bit more research on today, both the insane Red Scare report from the State Department and Marco Rubio. Take a look at who they're targeting. It'll become very clear to you that this is just about taking out anybody who disagrees with them. We talked about this crazy desegregation ruling from the Fifth Circuit that has major implications for public education across our country. And we talked about the 14th Amendment and the anniversary that's coming up. But really, the 14th Amendment has been a part of the conversation since Trump's first term in office, right? That was when he first said that he was going to get rid of birthright citizenship, which again, for most of us, including my family that has been in this country for more than 200 years, that is how we are citizens. But there's lots of news out there. We will always try and cover it for you. You can go to thevillagemedia.com to read the articles from Anoa, Dr. Candace King, and others who are reporting on the news. And you can always check in with us on Friday afternoon, Friday evening. We will go through the highlights of things that you might have missed, Hopefully, we hit on some things that you actually did know about, but maybe didn't understand why it was important news, or there were aspects of it that you didn't understand. But we will be breaking that all down for you on Fridays here at the Village News Week in Review.